No questions? You agree with me? Good. Let's look at the structure of a test case now. So basically, there are 5 required elements in each and every test case. And the first one being test case identifier or ID. So this is basically any unique identifier that you can provide for your test case. It may be numeric, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe sequential. You may have combined numbers like 1.5.6. It all depends on the identification system used by the company where you got employed. I personally prefer to give more meaningful unique identifiers, and I'll show you how to do this. What I do, I put a very short test case description or test case objective as the test case ID, starting with the functional area to which the test case belongs. That lets you, if you have test case IDs like this, they're easily sortable and you can easily understand to which area that test case belongs. Second required element of a test case is the set of features to be tested or steps or input values that you need to provide or need to undertake while running the test case. So basically those are user actions that you do to arrive to a particular point where you need to run your verifications. Next required element is actually the expected result or output values. So basically once you're done with all the steps written here, what is your expected result? What do you expect to see or get from the system? Again, the steps are very different. They may depend on the system, on the product, on the company, and range of products, and expected results are also very different. And the next element of the test case, required element, is the actual result. Again, the actual result, there are different companies have different requirements. Most companies are satisfied with pass or fail, and when you say pass for result, that means that your actual results are the same as expected. And when you mark the test case as fail with the actual result, that means something is wrong. And usually, I also recommend that you put the bug number in, at least you have the space, for the bug number in your test case, because this will make your subsequent executions much faster. But some companies do require you to write the actual result down. It is usually ISO 9000 certified companies. I've been through that, so I know what I'm talking about. In the biotech company where I was employed at first, we had our test suite, entire test suite was 1,000-something pages, and each page, when it is executed, because that company was certified, ISO 9000 certified, and audited by the customers and by the FDA, so during the test execution, each page of your test documentation, and one page could contain one test case, or one test case could spread across multiple pages. So each page was supposed to be signed by the tester who executed it, and signed by the tester who executed it, and also dated and signed by the witness who would say, okay, yes, I know this person, and she is who she is, and she did execute at this date and with this result. And in that documentation, there was a space left on the hard copy where we were supposed to write with the black or blue ink the actual result. So if the test case was passing, we could not say pass. We would have to say, yes, I got the dialog displayed and such message got displayed, or it did not get displayed and therefore the test case is failing. So there are different requirements. Most of the, I don't want to scare you, most of the companies do not, I repeat, do not require you to manually write the actual result. But some companies may. It all depends on the company and the project, and on the company's actually policy. So these are the required elements. In addition to that, your test cases may also have titles, but again, I make ID the titles, so I put verbal description indicative of test case objective as an ID. I make it unique. You can also put the goal or objective, which is basically the primary verification point of the test case. if you work, it is unlikely, but if you work on multiple projects at the same time, you may want to put project or application ID somewhere, so you know to which project that test case belongs. You may also put the functional area, so you can track your test cases to which functional area they belong. And again, when I write my test case IDs, I put functional area in the test case ID on the top. So you see to which functional area it belongs right away. You don't need to put anything extra. I highly recommend bug numbers for failed test cases. Just leave some space for the bug number in your test case. You can also classify your test cases as positive or negative. And you need this for the test execution or some planning when you execute your tests. Why you need that? Positive test cases in general have higher priority. So positive functional cases have higher priority. So if you're short in time and you already had like 4 cycles and you're on your 5th cycle, you don't have time to run everything. Run only positive cases and few negative. And if you have this classification in your test case, you can easily sort out the negative cases and not run them. You can also classify your test cases as manual versus automatable, but this is again for planning purposes. If your team is planning to use some automation, you may need to see how many automatable cases you have, so you can better plan your automation effort. And test environment, also you can put the operating system on which the test cases run, or database. I mean, you can put those details if those are important. Inputs to the test case can be done through the user interface, and this is how most of the black box testing is run. Or inputs can be done from interfacing systems or devices. For example, when I was working in a biotech company, we were testing instrumentation. The input to that instrumentation and the output as well was actually the file, the spreadsheet, the Excel spreadsheet with some test data that you prepare in advance, along with the biological samples. So we had to create those spreadsheets in advance, prepare some biological samples in tubes actually, physically, and then put everything in the instrument. You can have files as an inputs, and you can have databases. If your, let's say, test case is about performance, then database is one of the inputs. State of the system or environment, if you test on installations on different operating systems. Outputs, again, most of the outputs are done through the user interface or to interfacing systems or devices, files, databases, states of the application, or response time if you're talking about performance tests. Format of the test case, as I mentioned, is not essential. Usually you follow company standards. If there are no standards, you came in and you're the only person in the QA team, feel free to choose whatever works best for you. My personal preference is Excel, as I mentioned, but you can also use anything, Word, Notepad, WordPad. Classification of the test cases. As I said, it's very useful to classify them as positive and negative. Just if you run short in time, you can skip all negative or some of the negative in every other cycle, for example, or you can choose to run negative every 3rd or 4th or 5th cycle and run positive every cycle. Test cases can be also classified as functional, where we test the actual functionality of the software. Non-functional, where we test performance, stress, or load tests. And user interface specific. And when we do the exercise, we will write a couple of functional and then UI specific test cases. When you write your test cases, you can specify your verifications implicitly or explicitly. It will determine how lengthy your test case. For example, if you test a wizard, you know what wizard is, right? It's a sequence of screen where you go and provide some information or make some selections, and at the end you will get some result. For example, you are a new user for a web commerce site, and you are creating a user for yourself. On the first screen, you are supposed to provide your username and password. Choose your username and password. Then you can provide some personal information, maybe then some financial information. So when you write your test case, you have a choice. You can write a test case per each page. So basically, you create test case number 1, where you test functionality of the first page. where you can create a user, select a username and a password. Then when you go to the second page, you may have, this test case sequentially run after the first one. You can make it a sequential, a separate test case, or you can put everything in one test case. It all depends whether your test cases are manual or are to be automated. Because if those test cases, will be automated eventually, if there are plans to automate, I highly recommend you do sequential flows, because you cannot arrive to the second page unless you go through the first page. Since you will be going through the first page anyway, why don't you save some effort, eventually, and provide everything in one test case? If you always have test cases manual, you may choose to have a separate test case for each page. It depends, actually, you can ask your peers what is the tradition they follow in this QA group, and write it this way. And when you do verifications from page to page, you can say in your test cases, okay, click next, verify page number 2 is displayed. Or you can say, click next, on the next page, enter such and such information, right? So in the first, version, you provide explicit verification, verify this page is displayed. But this is not necessary, because unless that second page is displayed, you cannot enter the information that you're supposed to enter, right? So it's up to you how you write, and it's up to the company on the requirements. In that biotech company that I was mentioning, we always had to have explicit verifications. We had to say, click next, verify page number 2 is displayed. We had like 20-25 verification points. We could have 20-25 verification points in one test case. We had very lengthy test cases. It is not, easy to maintain. So if you can write shorter and simpler test cases, I highly recommend that. It's easier to execute, and it's easier to digest and maintain. But again, it may depend on your application and the user flow. The test case, Michael, that you mentioned that takes 1 day to execute, we had a test case that took 3 days to execute. Only because we had to prepare files, biological samples, some reagents, mix everything, then drop reagents into biological samples and put in the instrument. The preparation took 2.5 days, and then the test itself took half day. But the actual execution time from start to finish took 3 days. So, but those are corner cases. I would say, usually test cases, UI test cases are very easy. You can easily do 50 a day without any problem. But average, again, 8 to 10. And also when we talk about test cases, we can classify cases as systematic testing versus ad hoc. Systematic testing, where you create those test cases systematically to cover each and every feature, each and every dialogue. And when we're talking about ad hoc, this is random testing or exploratory testing, where people just sit in front of the computer and do whatever they want. And in my experience, there are 2 types of people who are very good in ad hoc. Those are either newbies, people who do not know the application at all, and they have no idea what they are doing. So if you put those people, by the desktop, they will find you bugs you could never even imagine exist in your software, because they will start clicking left and right, doing all the untypical flows, because they don't know the application, right? They will click wherever they want, and they will eventually find very good bugs. And the other class of people who are very good in ad hoc are very experienced senior QAs who know the application very well, and they know that there are some test gaps probably here and there, but because of timelines and pressure and schedules, they never had time to actually run those scenarios that they had in the back of their minds, and they can use this ad hoc as an opportunity to improve their test coverage. This is what we actually do in our company. I mentioned that we have most of our tests automated, 95%. We have still 5% of manual tests, and we run exploratory testing every few cycles just to make sure that whatever we automated is on the right track, and we don't have any bugs aside of that. Okay, now let's do the exercise. So on the back seats, do you see the fonts? Should I increase the fonts? Okay. Fine? Okay. Okay, this is This is the login screen of a client-server application. So we will use this snapshot as an example of a login screen, and we will be writing test cases to test this login screen. For simplicity, just one screen. And do you know what client-server application is? Okay, client-server is an application where you have the client piece and the server piece. Let me show you in a little more details what it is. What is the server? What do you think? Application. Where is that application runs? On the server machine. Server machine is usually a very powerful machine. Can be Dell, anything, any manufacturer actually. But it has to have a very powerful CPUs and a lot of memory and everything, because server is usually the piece of the application, the area of the application where most of the business logic sits. The server is processing most of the calls and it's redistributing work between the clients. There is usually one server and there may be multiple clients that connect to this server. Client can be installed on any of your desktops, for example, or laptops. So each server talks to multiple clients, and each client can talk to one or multiple servers, for example. Maybe another server, and the client may talk to this server as well. So when the client connects to this server, this client application, the desktop where that client is installed, can see all the data and all the processes that run on this server. Then client disconnects. Client cannot, usually, it cannot support two server sessions at the same time. So if you want to see what's going on this server, you need to disconnect from this server and reconnect from the same client. You need to re-log in to a different server, right? This is from where this field comes, IP address and name. So this is the server IP and or server name. So this screen is basically the client screen. When you involve this client application, this is the screen that you see as the very first screen where you need to fill out those fields to be able to connect to any of the servers of your choice. Is it clear? I'm just explaining what this application is about. Now, please open the Notepad application through Start Programs, Accessories, Notepad. We'll be writing our test cases in Notepad, but as I said, I prefer Excel, but it doesn't matter. So just Notepad is installed on each and every machine, so let's do it in Notepad. If you have any problems opening Notepad, raise your hand. No, everyone open? Good. Now, when we start a new test set, and test set or test suite is basically a set of test cases, let's give it a name. Because when you have multiple projects that you are working on, you need some identifier, right, for your test set. For this one, you can easily get the, product name. It is usually in the toolbar, right? In that one, it says WebWare with Sphere Client. So let's put the product name down. And now let's write our first test case. What is the first required element of a test case? ID. We can say our test ID is number 1. Or what I usually do with my test cases, I give the ID in the following way. What is the area that we are testing here? What is the functional area? Login, right? So what I usually do in my test cases, I am saying, okay, my test ID is login dialog. I also mentioned that when you start writing your test cases, you always start with the positive functional test cases, as those are the most important cases. So, and by the way, when we look at this dialog, tell me what kind of positive functional test cases we should write on the high level.
Valid username.
Right. So we need to write the cases where we can log in with the valid username and valid password and valid server credentials, right? And by the way, talking about terminology, when we say, for example, valid IP address, and what is the IP address? Do you know? So the IP address is a unique combination of numbers. It usually has, 4 positions, and that IP address identifies each and every server on the network, each and every desktop on the network. So each machine has its own IP. Some IPs can be Internet Protocol addresses. This is what IP is. So the IPs can be static or can be dynamic. So if the IP is static, that means the IP of the object will be retained across multiple reboots. When it is dynamic, then there is some so-called DHCP server which will may reassign the IP number and redistribute the IP number when the server or desktop is being rebooted. But anyway, so when we say valid IP address, what do we mean by valid IP address? What does it mean, valid?
Well, there is a server behind to log in into.
Right. There is a server, there is a physical machine that does exist, right? This is one. And number 2, it is running. It is on and running, because if the server does exist on the network, but it is turned off for whatever reason, you cannot reach that IP. So subsequently, you cannot log in. So that's what I'm saying. When you write your test cases, always keep in mind who is your audience. Usually when you say valid server IP, people will understand. But this is a very simplistic example. There may be other cases where you use some terminology which may be ambiguous. Imagine someone else who is running your test cases. Always, if your test cases are to be executed by a remote team, for example, always make sure there is no ambiguities in your test cases, so people can run them freely. So let's say the first test case, few cases would be, okay, login by using valid credentials. Those are functional positive cases, right? Then we also have this checkbox, right? So we need to provide a test case to use Windows session credentials. So this login capability is very frequently used. What it means, when you log into the operating system, when you open your, let's say, Windows session, and by the way, this client is a Windows application. It can only be run on Windows. So when you open your Windows session, you provide some credentials, your username and your password. So this is the option where you can check this box. And if you check this box, those 2 fields become disabled. And system will take your Windows session ID and pass it to the server. And will try to log you in with those credentials. Now, username. When we say username, valid username, what do we mean by valid username?
User exists.
This user has to exist, and it has to be registered with the server. So server has to recognize this user. What it means as a setup, before you run any test cases, you would need to create those users with those passwords and register them with the server. Only then, only after that, you can run your test cases. And of course, valid password is a password which is associated with that user and stored in a server database, right? So when you use this username and this password, and you connect to the server will recognize the username, it will match the password, and then you can only log in. Apart from the logging in, what else should we test while looking at this dialog?
The button.
Close.
The button, which button?
The buttons.
Buttons, okay. So all buttons will need to be tested, right? Which means login is the first button, of course we'll have to use it when we log in. What this button is supposed to do?
Close the window.
Close the window. This button help, what it is supposed to do?
Open the help.
Open the help dialog, right? And you need to check with the specs because usually when you click help, help dialog is supposed to be displayed. If by specs your application supports content sensitive help, then this clicking on this button should open you help topics focused on the login section, right? But it is not always necessary. It depends on your spec. If your application does not support content sensitive help, then it will be just general help dialog and the users can search on their own. What else do we need to test?
The GUI testing, basically.
GUI testing? Which GUI testing you mean?
The name, like whether it displays the VMware vSphere client.
Yeah, this is right. So basically each and every element on this dialog needs to be tested. So apart from functional tests, you need to run some UI tests. You need to verify the title, of the dialog, the logo, right, company logo, all the graphics,
The list.
this message, everything. Also, this is the combo list, right? This is combo list, and this list is supposed to remember, I can tell you by the specs, it's supposed to remember the last 20 IP addresses or names of the servers to which you were logging in from this client. So basically, you would need to have a test case where you have 20 sessions open, and then when you run the 21st, you need to open and see that you still have those 20 addresses in the list. Or maybe 10, I don't remember, 20, okay, 20. Okay, this button, what's supposed to do? Close the dialog. So basically, you need to have a test case for each and every UI element, on the dialog. And I can tell you that positive functional cases are the most important. And those are the ones that you run each and every cycle. UI test cases may not be run every cycle. Because I can tell you, no matter how much time you have, because of some delays in development, feature changes or some other stuff, you will not have that much time as you requested. And in this case, you will have to prioritize. So UI tests may be executed every other cycle. So they do not need to be run every cycle, just because some of the UI elements, let's say functionality of those buttons, it comes from the standard UI libraries. And developers do use those standard libraries, and those are unlikely to break. So, and plus, some of them, let's say login button, you will use it every time when you run other functional tests, because to run any other tests, you need to log in first, right? So you'll have to log in, and only then you can run your functional tests. So login button will be exercised. Those buttons, again, can be tested every other cycle, just because they're unlikely to break. Same is with the logo and graphics, because unless there is an explicit change and request to change the graphics, it is unlikely to be changed. Functionality is touched frequently, because this is where developers work and develop actively. And those are likely to break. Functional test cases and tests will need to be run every cycle. Now let's do the test case ID. So we have login dialog.
I just want to add
Yeah.
the close button
Yeah.
on the title bar.
Yes.
Comes from Microsoft.
Right.
So we don't have to measure.
Yeah. There are some things that you
Microsoft
can
doesn't
skip.
pay us money. So.
If they don't pay, you don't test. So the login dialog underscore valid inputs, because we are writing positive functional test case. We have valid inputs, and we can log by either IP address or by server name. Let's do server name first. What is the next required element of a test case?
Title.
No, this is title, right? So this is ID/title. Steps. Steps. What is the first step? Very first step?
Open login.